My son vanished from my life 3 years ago, or so his wife made me believe. Every second Tuesday, I drove 50 minutes down the Trans-Canada to drop off $800 in cash at her door. Money, she said, was keeping my grandson fed and the collectors away. Then one morning, the woman behind the counter at the Service Canada office pulled me aside and said quietly, "Mr. Beaumont, I think you need to look at your son's death certificate. Something about it isn't right." That was the moment the floor disappeared from beneath my 67-year-old feet and took everything I thought I knew down with it. I'm glad you're here with me. Before this story unfolds, tell me something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop a city or province in the comments. I'd love to know. And one thing before we go further, some details in this story have been changed to protect those involved, but the lesson you're going to hear is absolutely real. Now let's begin. The drive from my place in Sudbury down to my daughter-in-law Melissa's house in Barrie took exactly 51 minutes if the 400 cooperated, which it didn't always in November. I knew every rest stop, every OPP cruiser hiding behind the overpass near Coldwater, every kilometer of that gray Ontario highway. At 67, with a bad knee from 34 years, working heavy equipment up in the mines and hands that ached every morning from November through March, that drive felt longer each time. But every second Tuesday meant one thing: payment day. $800. I kept the bills in a plain white envelope tucked in the inside pocket of my coat. 8 crisp hundreds I'd pulled from the bank on Monday morning, money from my pension. From the small odd jobs I still took doing equipment consulting for a junior mining operation near Lively, because my CPP and OAS together barely covered my rent on Elm Street and my prescriptions. $800 might not seem like much to some people, but when you're 67 and every extra dollar comes from getting up before sunrise and driving on icy roads to earn it, $800 is everything. I made a promise, though, and Raymond Beaumont keeps his promises. I turned off the highway at Dunlop Street and pulled into Melissa's subdivision just past 2 in the afternoon. The houses were identical brick front semis on a crescent that curved back on itself like a horseshoe. Hers was the one with the blue recycling bin still at the curb from last week, and a kid's bicycle tipped over on the front step. My grandson, Owens. He was 8 years old, gap-toothed, wild-haired, obsessed with hockey and rocks geology. He corrected me whenever I called them rocks. He had his father's jawline and his late grandmother's way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. I grabbed the envelope and walked to the door. My knee complained on the porch steps the way it always did. I knocked twice. My knock. Melissa knew the sound. About 20 seconds passed. I could hear the television inside. Some afternoon talk show. Then footsteps on the hardwood. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened maybe 4 inches, stopped by the chain. Melissa's face appeared in the gap. She was 34 but looked older those days. Her hair was pulled back tight, no makeup. Shadows under her eyes that looked permanent. Raymond. Her voice had no warmth in it. "I've got this month's payment," I said, holding up the envelope. Her hand came through the gap. I placed it in her palm. She thumbed through the bills quickly, the way she always did, then pulled her hand back without opening the door any wider. "Is Owen here?" I asked, leaning slightly to see past her. "He's at school. It's 2:30, I said. "School's been out. After school program," she said. "He's got hockey practice after." Her eyes moved past me toward the street, quickly, then back. She did that sometimes. I had always chalked it up to grief. My son Daniel had died 3 years ago, car accident on the QEW. That's what she'd told me. That's what the paperwork had shown, and I'd always assumed the nervousness, the distance, the chain on the door was what a young widow looked like. But this felt different. This was sharper. More careful. "I could wait," I offered. "Even just 10 minutes with him. He's exhausted after practice, Raymond." "It's not a good night. Melissa, I haven't seen him in 3 weeks." "I know. I'll have him call you tomorrow." She was already closing the door. "Thank you for driving down." The deadbolt slid home with a sound that hit harder than it should have. I stood on that porch for a moment, looking at the brass house numbers. 26 months, 52 payments of $800 each, $41,600, not counting the extra I'd sent for Owen's hockey registration, for the furnace that apparently died in February, for the dental bill last spring that Melissa said their insurance wouldn't cover. All of it going to keep the lights on and the bank from seizing the house, she'd said, because Daniel had died without enough life insurance and the bills had stacked up fast. I turned to go. That's when I heard it, not the television. A laugh, a man's laugh, low and easy, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. The kitchen, maybe. Or the back room. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Melissa had told me 100 times she wasn't seeing anyone. Said she couldn't think about that. Said every dollar went to Owen and the house and the debt. Said my $800 a month was the only thing keeping them in this province. But there was a man inside that house right now, laughing like he lived there. I walked back to my truck and sat for a moment with the engine off. The November wind rocked the cab gently. Down the street, a Canada Post truck was making its rounds, the red and white moving slow between driveways, like it always did in this neighborhood. Everything looked the same as it always did. And yet something had shifted. The way ice shifts under your feet, a half second before it gives way. The drive back to Sudbury felt like the longest one I'd ever made. I got home after dark and sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea I didn't drink. My wife Margaret's photograph was on the counter where it always was her at 60, standing at the edge of Lake Ramsey in August, laughing at something I'd said, the kind of laugh that still made me feel like I'd done something right just by being in the same room as her. She'd been gone 2 years now. Stroke. Fast. She was washing dishes on a Thursday morning, and then she was gone. The doctor said it was massive, said she wouldn't have felt anything. I held on to that. What I didn't say out loud, what I hadn't said to anyone, was that I knew the truth about why Margaret's health had declined so fast in that last year. She had never recovered from losing Daniel. Not really. She'd put on a good face at Sunday dinners and at church. But at night, I'd hear her. The crying that she thought was quiet enough that I wouldn't notice. The rosary beads clicking in the dark. She'd lost 15 pounds in the year after Daniel died. She stopped calling her friends. She started forgetting small things, the stove burner, her keys, which day it was. The doctors said it was grief-related cognitive decline and gave her pills. I said it was a broken heart and gave her time. Neither of us gave her enough. She had held Daniel's photograph on the last coherent morning she had, held it against her chest, and told it she loved him. I thought about that man's laugh in Melissa's house, about the chain on the door, about Owen's bicycle tipped over on the front step, like a child who'd come home in a hurry. I told myself I was tired, told myself grief made people strange and that Melissa had earned the right to rebuild her life without my judgment. Told myself it was nothing. But the question sat in my chest like a stone that wouldn't dissolve. Who was that man? 2 weeks later, I was at the Service Canada office on Paris Street renewing a form for my pension when I ran into Doreen Fafard. Doreen was 62, small and sharp-featured, with 28 years behind the Service Canada counter, and the kind of institutional memory that made her better at her job than any computer system they'd installed. She'd processed Margaret's paperwork after the stroke. She'd been kind to me in the specific way that government workers are kind when they see a man who looks like he's barely keeping it together. She waved me over before I reached the counter. "Raymond," she said quietly. "Do you have a few minutes? There's something I need to show you." "Not here. Lunch place across the street." "Noon?" I sat across from her at a vinyl booth at the diner on Paris Street with 2 coffees between us. Doreen had a manila envelope. She set it flat on the table and didn't open it right away. "I want to say first that I could be wrong," she said. "And I want to say that I'm only doing this because I've known your family for years and because I think you deserve to know what I found." She opened the envelope. "About a month ago, a woman came into our office to update direct deposit information. She provided identification Ontario driver's license. The name on the license was Daniel Beaumont." She let that sit for a second. "That's your son's name. I know, because I processed his file when he was reported deceased." The photo on the license was a woman in her early 30s. Brown hair. She said she was processing her husband's estate and needed access to a dormant account linked to his sin. I couldn't speak. I just looked at her. I flagged it internally, Doreen said, because something felt wrong. The SIN number she gave matched your son's records, which meant someone had access to his personal information. So I went back to the death registration. Ontario records this time. She slid a printed page toward me. This is a copy of the death certificate you would have been given. Daniel James Beaumont. Date of death, November 3rd, 2021. Cause, blunt force trauma, motor vehicle accident. Certifying physician, Dr. Aaron Lipsky. Hamilton General Hospital. That's the one Melissa gave me, I said. My voice sounded far away. I know. Now look at this. She pulled out a second sheet. This is from the Ontario Death Registry Verification Database. I ran the certificate number. She pointed to a row of red text at the bottom of the printout. Record not found. What does that mean? I asked. It means this certificate number doesn't match any registered death in Ontario, Doreen said carefully. I also looked up Dr. Aaron Lipsky. There is no physician by that name registered with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. Hamilton General has no record of treating anyone by Daniel's name in November 2021. The coffee cup was in my hand. I set it down before I dropped it. Doreen, I said. I know, she said. And Raymond, I need you to hear this carefully. I could be wrong. There could be a data entry error somewhere, a filing problem, something administrative. But I've been doing this work for 28 years, and I've processed hundreds of death registrations. This certificate is not right. The format is slightly off the provincial seal placement. The font in the physician section. Small things, but wrong things. She paused. I wrote down the plate number of the car the woman got into when she left our office. I have a cousin with the OPP. He ran it for me. She slid a third piece of paper across the table. The vehicle was registered to a Ryan Bellerose, a Barrie address on a street 2 blocks from Melissa's house. Does that name mean anything to you? Doreen asked. It didn't. Not yet. I drove back to Sudbury in a state that wasn't quite shock and wasn't quite anger. It was something more like the feeling you get in the seconds after a roof beam cracks before it falls, when you know it's coming but there's still a moment of absolute stillness. I called my older sister Carol. She was 69, retired from the OPP after 31 years, and the most methodical person I had ever known. She kept notes on everything. She remembered everything. When I was 12 and needed someone to talk to, I went to Carol. When Margaret died, Carol drove 6 hours from Kingston to sit with me. When I didn't know who else to trust with something like this, Carol was the only answer. I told her everything. The payments, the chain on the door, the laugh, Doreen's findings, the name, Ryan Bellerose. Carol didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a silence on the line. Then she said, "Don't call Melissa. Don't go back down there yet. I'll be at your place Friday morning." Carol arrived at 7 in the morning with her laptop, a banker's box of printed resources she'd accumulated over a career in fraud investigations, and a bag of fresh Tim Hortons she'd picked up on the way through town. She sat up at my kitchen table like she'd done it 1,000 times. In a way, she had. "First," Carol said, opening her laptop, "we verify the death certificate independently." Within 2 hours, she had confirmed everything Doreen had found. The certificate number was fabricated. It followed no valid Ontario sequence. Dr. Aaron Lipsky did not exist in any provincial medical registry going back 20 years. Hamilton General Hospital had no admission, treatment, or discharge record for anyone matching Daniel's name or date of birth in November 2021. "It's forged," Carol said. She didn't say it dramatically. She said it the way she'd said things like this for 30 years flatly, because facts didn't need decoration. Whoever made this knew enough to copy the general format, but not enough to know how Ontario's numbering system works. The district code prefix is wrong. I pressed both hands flat on the table. So Daniel might be alive. Based on what Doreen described, and what we're looking at here, Carol said, yes. I think Daniel is alive. She looked at me over her reading glasses. The question is where, and for how long, and who this Ryan Bellerose is. She typed the name into a search she'd run through professional databases she still had quiet access to. Ryan Bellerose, 36 years old, Barrie, Ontario. No criminal record. Self-employed, listed as a contractor. He'd had a previous address in Brantford. And before that, Stony Creek. Stony Creek, I said slowly. That's where Daniel and Melissa lived before they moved to Barrie. Carol looked at me. How long before? I counted back. They moved to Barrie about 2 years before Daniel. Before I was told he died. So Bellerose may have been in their lives for some time. Carol pulled up a property search. He's listed as a co-renter at an address on Grove Street in Barrie. Melissa Beaumont is the primary leaseholder. I sat back in my chair. The kitchen was quiet. Through the window, the November light was thin and gray the way it gets in Sudbury in November. Like the sky has given up trying. She's not a widow, I said. Not if Daniel's alive, Carol said carefully. And if he is, then someone convinced you and Margaret that your son was dead. Someone collected $41,000 from a man on a pension to support a household that was already supported. She paused. Raymond, that's fraud. That's not a misunderstanding. She spent the rest of the day building a picture from financial records, social media fragments, and the kind of patient cross-referencing that had made her excellent at her job for 3 decades. By evening, what she'd assembled was devastating. Daniel and Melissa had been having serious problems before the supposed accident. A neighbor in Stony Creek had filed a noise complaint. There had been a separation notice filed with a family law office in Hamilton filed, and then withdrawn 4 months later. Ryan Bellerose appeared in photographs on a since-deleted Instagram account, standing next to Melissa at a backyard gathering. The photo was time-stamped 14 months before Daniel was reported dead. There was more. Carol had found a business registration, a numbered Ontario company, registered in Melissa's name 18 months ago. The company had received transfers from an account that traced back to a numbered holding associated with Bellerose. Roughly $2,200 a month, consistent and regular, for the past year and a half. So she has income, I said. Comfortable income, Carol confirmed. Your $800 a month on top of that isn't survival money. It's supplemental. It's extra. I thought about all those Tuesday drives. The icy 400 inches February. The knee that swelled every winter. The consulting work I'd taken to make sure Owen had a registered education savings account and new hockey equipment and whatever else an 8-year-old needed. I thought about Margaret holding Daniel's photograph on her last good morning. Where is he? I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. I don't know yet, Carol said. But I know where to look. She found him on a Thursday, 2 weeks later. Not in Barrie. Not in Ontario. Daniel James Beaumont, age 38, was living in Kelowna, British Columbia. He'd been there for 2.5 years. He was working for a landscaping company. His social media accounts were private, created under a slightly altered name, Dan Beaumont James. But the profile photo was unmistakably my son. I would have known that jaw, that hairline, that particular way of holding his shoulders in any photograph on earth. He was alive. He had been alive for the entire 3 years I'd believed he was gone. He had been alive when I sat at Margaret's hospital bedside and watched her slip away. He had been alive when I'd stood at her funeral in the January cold and told myself at least she and Daniel were together now. He had been alive for every one of those Tuesday drives, every envelope, every $800. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after Carol showed me the photograph. I didn't cry. I don't know what I did, exactly. I think I just held very still. The way you do when something is too large to move around yet. Carol put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything. She'd seen this kind of stillness before. In other people. In other kitchens. After a while I said, Owen, I know. Carol said, if Daniel is in Kelowna and Melissa is in Barrie, Owen is in that house with Melissa and Bellerose. I paused. Does he know his father is alive? Carol was quiet. He's 8, I said. He thinks his dad is dead. He grew up thinking his dad is dead. Carol closed her laptop carefully. Raymond, we need to call the police. She had a contact at the Barrie OPP detachment, a detective named Patricia Kwan, who'd trained under Carol 20 years ago and who, according to Carol, was the sharpest fraud investigator in the central region. We drove down to Barrie on a gray Tuesday morning and sat across from Detective Kwan in an interview room at the detachment on Sperling Drive. We laid everything out. The false death certificate, the forged physician's credentials, the financial trail, the Belarus connection, Daniel's confirmed location in Kelowna, the $41,000 in payments made over 26 months to a woman whose husband was not dead. Detective Kwan reviewed everything without speaking. Then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Beaumont, how long did you say you'd been making these payments?" 26 months, I said. $41,600, not including the extras. She nodded slowly. "We're going to need some time to build this properly. I want a warrant before we go near that house." She looked at Carol. "Can you give me a week?" "We'll give you whatever you need," Carol said. It took 9 days. On a Thursday morning in late November, Carol and I sat in Detective Kwan's unmarked Jeep on a street 2 blocks from Melissa's house. 2 OPP cruisers were parked around the corner on a parallel street, out of sight. My hands were flat on my knees. I'd been awake since 3 in the morning. Not from nerves, exactly. From something older and heavier than nerves. At 7:48, a blue Honda Civic pulled into Melissa's driveway. The driver's door opened and Ryan Belarus stepped out, stocky, mid-30s, wearing a work jacket and construction boots. He went to the passenger side and opened the door. Melissa stepped out. They walked inside together, like people who'd done it 10,000 times. 20 minutes later, a school bus stopped at the corner. Owen climbed off, backpack over one shoulder, hockey bag over the other. He walked toward the house with his head down, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. 8 years old. And carrying that much gear on his own. My throat tightened. "He's okay," Carol said quietly. "He's going to be okay." Kwan picked up her radio. "All units. Move on my mark." The OPP cruisers rolled around the corner without lights. Officers approached the front door. Kwan got out, and Carol and I followed a step behind. The knock. Ontario Provincial Police. Open the door. Silence. Then movement inside. A shout, muffled. Footsteps. Running somewhere toward the back of the house. A second officer was already at the rear. The door opened. Melissa stood in the frame in a bathrobe. When she saw me standing behind Detective Kwan, the color left her face completely. "Melissa Beaumont," Kwan said. "You're under arrest for fraud over $5,000 and uttering forged documents. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay." She continued reading the charter rights as the officer stepped forward with handcuffs. Melissa didn't fight it. She went very still, the way people do when something they've been waiting for finally arrives. She looked at me once, just briefly, and then looked away. Belarus was arrested in the kitchen, where he'd apparently been heading for the back door. He said nothing. He just looked at the floor. I walked through the front door of that house and into the living room. Owen was on the couch, still in his coat, his hockey bag at his feet. He was looking at me with enormous eyes. "Grandpa," he said. "Hey, bud." My voice was steady. "I don't know how." "Come here." He crossed the room and I held on to him, and for a few seconds I didn't care about any of it, not the $41,000, not the forged paperwork, not the 51-minute drives in February. Just this kid. 8 years old. His grandmother had died loving him, and his father had chosen to be somewhere else entirely, and none of that was his fault at all. "Is my mom in trouble?" he whispered. "There are some things the police need to sort out," I said carefully. "But you're going to be okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He pulled back and looked at my face the way kids look at you when they're trying to figure out if the adult is telling the truth. Margaret used to do the same thing. It skipped a generation, apparently. "Okay," he said. "Just that." And he leaned back against my shoulder. Carol appeared at my side. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my back, the same way she had every time anything hard had happened since we were children in a farmhouse outside Chelmsford 40-some years ago. Detective Kwan coordinated with BC authorities that same morning. Daniel was located at his Kelowna address and taken in for questioning. He had not forged the death certificate himself that had been Melissa and Bella Rose, but he had known about it. He had provided his personal identification information willingly. He had signed documents that facilitated the fraud. He had not once, in 3 years, attempted to contact me or tell me he was alive. He had known what his absence was costing me and had chosen to stay silent. I learned that later, in a courthouse in Barrie, sitting in the front row with Owen's hand in mine and Carol beside us. Melissa received 4 years for fraud over $5,000, uttering forged documents, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She was also ordered to make full restitution. Ryan Bellarose received 3 years for conspiracy and document forgery, along with a restitution order. Daniel, my son, received 18 months, to be served conditionally in the community, given that he had not been the primary architect of the fraud and had cooperated with the investigation once located. He was also ordered to pay restitution jointly with Melissa. He sat at the defense table and didn't look at me for most of the proceedings. At one point near the end, he turned. I didn't look away from him. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just looked at him until he turned back. In the hallway after, his lawyer arranged for 5 minutes. Daniel stood in front of me in a gray dress shirt, thinner than I remembered. Older, looking somewhere in the vicinity of my shoulder rather than my face. "Dad," he said, "I don't know how to—" "You don't have to explain the mechanics," I said. "I understand the mechanics. What I want to know is one thing." I paused. "Did you know about your mother? Did you know she was sick?" He swallowed. "I heard. After. From an old friend in Sudbury." His voice was rough. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten." "She held your photograph," I said. "Every day. For a year and a half. She picked up your photograph, and she talked to it. She told you about Owen. She told you about the weather. She asked you to forgive her, though God only knows what she thought she'd done wrong." I stopped for a moment. "She thought she was the reason you were gone, that she'd somehow failed you. That's what she died believing." Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm going to forgive you," I said. "Not today. Maybe not for a long time, but I'll get there. Because holding on to this is too heavy, and I've got a grandson who's going to need both of us eventually to be steady for him. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust, and trust isn't the same as access. You will earn your way back into Owen's life slowly and on his terms, not yours. When he's ready to see you, I'll tell him. Until then, you don't contact him. You don't contact me. You give me space and you give him space. And you show us who you decide to be from here." He nodded, eyes still closed. The officer stepped forward, and I walked back down the hallway to where Owen was sitting on a bench with Carol, drinking a hot chocolate from the Tim Hortons bag she'd brought. He looked up when he saw me. "Ready to go home?" I asked. "Can we stop at the gas station on the 400? He said. "The one with the good chips." "Yeah," I said, "we can stop there." He took my hand as we walked toward the parking lot, something he'd stopped doing around age 6 when apparently it wasn't cool enough anymore. He did it now without thinking about it. I didn't say anything. I just walked. The restitution came through in partial payments over several months as assets were liquidated. My sister helped me organize it properly, the way she organizes everything in columns, clearly labeled, with specific intentions for each amount. Owen's RESP, which I'd been supplementing on my pension, got topped up first. 20,000. Locked in. His to use for whatever came next: university, trades, whatever direction this particular kid decided to go, because he was the kind of kid who would decide something and mean it. The furnace I'd replaced in my own place that winter, the one that had died in February and that I'd put on a credit line to cover, got paid off. It felt good to clear that. I put some into a small home renovation fund. Owen's bedroom in my spare room needed proper shelving and a real desk. Because he was with me now, full time, at least until things settled, and he was doing his homework on the kitchen table and I wasn't going to have that. The rest I set aside carefully. Not for anything dramatic. Just the kind of cushion that means you don't wake up at 3 in the morning doing math. Owen and I settled into something. It wasn't easy, and I'm not going to pretend it was. He had hard nights. He had questions I didn't always know how to answer. He had a lot of feelings about his mother that lived right at the surface and sometimes came out sideways at breakfast, or in the middle of a hockey game, or just before sleep when the house was quiet and there was no more busy to hide behind. I answered what I could. I said I don't know when I didn't. I said, that's a fair thing to be angry about, when it was. I tried to never speak badly about his parents to him, because he was going to make up his own mind eventually and I wanted it to be his mind, not mine. On the Saturday after Christmas, we were in the garage together. I'd cleared enough space for a workbench, nothing fancy, just a solid surface with good lighting and the basic tools I'd accumulated over 30 years of weekend projects. Owen had been watching me sand a small wood box for an hour, asking questions the way kids do when they're actually interested. The relentless, specific kind of questions that mean they're paying real attention. Can I try? He asked. That's why we're here, I said. I showed him how to hold the sandpaper, how to go with the grain, how much pressure was enough and how much was too much. He bent over the wood with his tongue in the corner of his mouth, the exact way his grandmother used to concentrate. I had to look away for a second and breathe. Grandpa, he said without looking up. Did you teach my dad this stuff? Some of it, I said. He was more interested in hockey. Owen smiled. I'm interested in both. I know, I said. That's going to serve you well. In March, Owen and I drove to Walden to put flowers on Margaret's grave. He'd chosen sunflowers from the grocery store, orange and yellow, because he said they were the ones she had in her garden photo on my phone. He was right. She'd grown them every summer along the back fence. We stood at the headstone in the cold. The ground was still frozen. Our breath made clouds. Grandma, Owen said, out loud and matter-of-fact, the way 8-year-olds speak to things they're not sure are listening. Just so you know, I'm okay. Grandpa is taking care of me. We're building stuff in the garage. He paused. Also, I scored twice last week, so that's going pretty good too. I put my hand on his shoulder. You think she knows? He asked. I think she'd want to, I said. He nodded, satisfied with that, and set the sunflowers against the stone. On the drive back, the sun was low over the snowfields along the highway. The particular kind of flat, white winter light that Sudbury does in March when the season is almost done but not quite. Owen was in the passenger seat eating chips from the gas station bag, looking out the window. Grandpa, he said. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't stop coming. Even when they didn't let you in, you kept coming. I kept my eyes on the road for a moment. The white lines moving past. That was never something I was going to stop doing, I said. He went back to looking out the window. The chips crinkled. The highway stretched out ahead of us, long and familiar. Every pothole and overpass exactly where I expected it to be. I lost a lot. I know that. I lost years of believing my son was gone. I lost the money, though the money came back. More or less. I lost something harder to name, some version of my family that I had believed in, and that turned out not to be real. And I lost Margaret twice, once to the stroke, and once to the knowledge that she had spent her last year and a half grieving a lie. That one I'm still working on. But I have Owen, this particular 8-year-old, who scores twice, and cares about the grain of the wood, and puts sunflowers on his grandmother's grave, and asks the exact right question at the exact right time without knowing he's doing it. I have Carol, who drove 6 hours the morning I needed her without being asked. I have the garage bench and the Saturday mornings and the chips from the gas station on the 400. And I have this. The ability to say out loud to anyone who needs to hear it. Check. If something doesn't add up, check. If the door keeps opening only 4 inches, if the phone calls get shorter, if the story has a detail that shifts between tellings, don't be polite about it. Don't tell yourself you're tired and imagining things. Don't let love make you afraid to ask the question. The most generous thing you can do for the people who depend on you is to see clearly. Grief will blur your vision if you let it. Fear will blur it worse. But you owe it to the Owen in your life. Whoever that is. Whatever they're called, to keep your eyes open, even when it's hard. Especially then, if this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me you're still here. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this, send it to them. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing someone else has been through the dark and come out the other side. I'm grateful you were here with me tonight. Take care of the people you love. And don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. The truth is always better than a comfortable lie. Always.